Discussing video games online is like marking yourself in red and enabling PvP out in the wild west of cyberspace. You could say something as inane as, despite this thing being a genuine 6 out of 10 at best, I really liked it, and you'd spawn in some guy to tell you how objectively wrong you are because they watched a super long video about why that thing you enjoyed sucks, despite their opinion being irrelevant to your own enjoyment of it. Another common occurrence is people telling you that gaming is dying because of egregious monetization and their favorite franchises heading for the gutter. I've even made my own video about how Overwatch 2 would invariably die because of how expensive it is to play the game and earn skins now. But there's a different path forward that is rarely discussed. I'm not concerned with doom posting about how gaming is on its way out. Instead, I want to look at why outrage is so pervasive when we talk about video games, and why that changes the success of any game into a very toxic discussion, transforming celebrations into outrage. Let's look at how gaming continues to thrive in spite of claims that the end times are near. Before we grapple with how frustrating it is to discuss games in a critical context, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Outrage is far too pervasive in gaming. It creates this ugly and unpleasant mix of righteous zeal mixed with anger, harassment, schadenfreude, and all these other things that are seemingly normalized because we can just tell ourselves we're rallying for pro-consumer outcomes, while convincing ourselves to give up on gaming and write off the failures of AAA as proof of a dying medium. The cynicism that rots gaming discourse is so bad that a game being good is no longer a fact to celebrate, it's framed as exceptionalism and invites people to be negative about the entire medium, as opposed to assuaging fears that gaming is dying. We have to grapple with that outrage and understand it, before we take it and shoot it from full court. I think most people would agree that games shouldn't be $70 US. In fact, if you really want to vomit, they're actually around $120 to $125 down under. It's no secret that everyone hates this pricing. I don't think gaming has ever been less accessible. Some of you might remember that during the height of the pandemic, a $1,500 PC would get you 3-year-old parts because of the crypto boom coinciding with it. Top this off with games effectively being more expensive than the box price. If you look at games like Destiny, Halo, or Call of Duty, it's not hard to tell that people are pretty fed up with not having their time or money respected, because you rarely see the full cost of being an active player of a given game because the box price is no longer the full experience. Gone are the days of just buying and owning a full game and its neat little secret features. Well, that's how the rhetoric tends to go anyway. I'm not here to tell them that their concerns are unwarranted or even less meaningful than they make them out to be. I'm more interested in reframing the narrative of gaming discourse as a dying medium. To give a very brief summary of gaming monetization over the years, I'll put it like this. In 1996, Meridian 59 was one of the first MMOs to feature a subscription model, which is now called pay-to-play, incurring a flat fee every month that allow users to play a game. Other capstone MMOs that followed included Ultima Online and EverQuest, which also used a pay-to-play model. In the 2000s, games from East Asia had egregious monetization. Some even had loot boxes and pay-to-win microtransactions, but the discussion and consciousness around what these kinds of pricing models were had yet to reach the mainstream in the West. In 2004, WoW released, changing the landscape of MMORPGs indefinitely, so much that many clones rose and fell, while WoW has largely remained the most successful sub-based MMO. In 2006, Bethesda released Horse Armor DLC for Oblivion. The reason this is significant is because it showed publishers that they could charge players for inane content while parading it around as optional downloadable content. This is in stark contrast to paying $20 to $40 for an expansion that radically expands a game. Basically, the industry recognized that you could sell players tried for content and somebody would lap it up. In 2007, TF2 released as part of Valve's beloved Orange Box alongside the Half-Life 2 games and Portal. In late 2010, TF2 would add keys and crates to the game, which seemed innocuous in its impact initially, but Valve has a knack for shifting the state of gaming, whether that's inherently good or bad in the given instance. Loot boxes in TF2 would lead to loot boxes in CSGO, which would lead to skin gambling because of the third-party market for digital items. A concept which, funnily enough, kind of mirrors the whole NFT craze, but at least these digital items had some functional use case, even if a very expensive skin in CSGO doesn't do anything except look pretty and rare. In 2013, Dota 2's big tournament called the International 3 changed gaming by showing that big money could be put into esports on one hand, and inventing the concept of a battle pass on the other. If you're not really in the know, a battle pass is simply added progression that invites players to play money so that they can receive additional rewards and progression for playing a game. In 2017, Fortnite would iterate on the battle pass, turning it into a seasonal form of monetization and progression as opposed to a once-a-year purchase to fund the pro scene. This radically shifted gaming monetization, and it skyrocketed Epic Games from just your average old developer with a lot of great games to one of the most powerful companies in gaming. I kinda skipped over mobile gaming because it's such a long and drawn out conversation. We all know that mobile gaming brings in a comical amount of money because you always hear of some crazy rich millionaire dropping lots of money on a game you've never heard of. The AAA space has embraced the notion of a live service. Instead of developing expansion packs that people buy once, you can perpetually create new content and new forms of progression that keeps people playing for longer to keep them paying for longer. It's no secret that constant revenue over a period of time is more desirable than a huge surge in sales that eventually plateaus over time. This usually comes at the benefit of the publisher in question, but not for the consumers since we have to pay more money overall to get a complete experience. Live service games are generally discussed in terms of their ability to make people spend. If you play every day and you're constantly confronted with new skins, whether they can be bought outright or not is irrelevant. You say to yourself, well, I play a lot, so I guess spending is okay. I am guilty of this. I've played a lot of Apex in the last 4 years, and have in fact bought skins that are like $18, which is absurd to think about. I rarely think of it as supporting the devs, and more, my 8-hour workday sucked, and I play this game a lot, which is dire when you really think about it, because $18 can buy a lot of my favorite indie games that'll give hundreds of hours of gameplay like Vampire Survivors or Slay the Spire, for example. We could wax on about free-to-play games and the cost of playing, but most free-to-play games have battle passes or added progression that are functionally one-time fees. Epic Games set the standard with the battle pass system, allowing users to simply buy one battle pass and own every subsequent battle pass in perpetuity, because the rewards for the premium pass usually give back the premium currency you used to buy it. Fortnite battle passes cost like 950 V-Bucks, and they usually give you back around 1500. You're always supposed to get more back than you put in. Games like Apex and Warzone follow a similar trend. The reason battle passes aren't the subject of a lot more vocal backlash in these games is because you can just avoid buying a battle pass during periods of time where work or your home life is too busy to accommodate playing the game. But here's the problem with battle passes from the perspective of a person who plays a lot of live service games. If you clock out from your 8-hour shift, you come home and you see the words daily quest bonus, login rewards, and all this other stuff. The game is pushing you to integrate logging in and seeing the game every day into your daily habits. In the past, people just did this because their friends were online on a game and they wanted to grind for some free armor in Halo or something to that effect. Today, you just have a second job. If you play mobile games, you have to spend your energy, hit your daily quest grinds, and make efficient use of your time. In multiplayer games, you're trying to make sure you don't miss anything in the battle pass that you unlocked with currency. Even if you paid for your first battle pass like a year ago, if you slip up now and you don't complete it, you're going to have to pay money for another battle pass because you didn't complete it in the given time frame. This forces you to be a good little consumer that finishes the battle pass early so they don't have to worry about these things. The time-limited nature of this monetization is a dual-edged sword. On one hand, you get constantly rewarded for playing, but on the other, if a player misses too many rewards, they will likely quit the game out of frustration, because the game is urging them to play out of obligation for rewards that will never come back, as opposed to playing a game that's enjoyable enough to keep their attention. The dynamics of player engagement are a lot more nuanced than that, but as someone who plays a decent amount of these live service games, I personally just drop a game if it sucks during a period of time or I don't really have the time to play. But people who are susceptible to addictive behaviors and really negatively affected by things like FOMO, they're gonna force themselves to play a game even if it's at a detriment to their health, organization, or responsibilities. That's an extreme example for sure, but we have to realize that harms and coercion in gaming scale differently for people based on their circumstances. I honestly think it's absurd that Blizzard has battle passes in COD and Diablo 4 which add in time-limited progression, so buying the game later in its lifespan effectively robs you of things you would have otherwise had access to in DLCs such as an expansion pack. Activision Blizzard is not alone in this practice, since Bungie, despite being free of Activision, make you buy the expansion, then make you buy every subsequent season to stay up to date with the content, effectively making a new Destiny expansion like $100. And if you're in Australia, it's actually 150. I could spend 5 hours explaining how awfully monetized Destiny is, but it's sufficient to say that it's basically an MMO that you pay to play. Except unlike its contemporaries, a lot of its best skins are paid ones. Recently, Overwatch 2 came out on Steam and it got review bombed to hell. If there's a place you can find out your live service game sucks, it's probably Steam. To give a recap on just how bad Overwatch 2 is from my video, it takes about 8 months of annoying mission grinding to unlock the ability to buy one new skin, because last I checked you only get 60 credits per week and a new skin costs $18.50. If you're wondering if the Battle Pass gives you premium currency to buy skins, no, it does not. It doesn't even refund the credits you use to buy the Battle Pass, which is why it's so egregious. So if you're interested in spending like 500 hours to get one skin, by all means, play Overwatch 2 and smile, because Overwatch 1 would have given you 500 loot boxes, which was objectively better than grinding this much for one skin. You know a game is completely atrocious when the gaming community, which hates loot boxes, is clamoring for them to come back in this particular instance. It doesn't stop there, however, because Diablo 4 came out, it's basically a paid live service game, and people hate it. I don't really want to get into it because I haven't played it myself, but just know that it is not well enjoyed by anyone that I know that is willing to buy and play this game just to have it be the most grating experience they've ever had in a video game. I could talk about games that have heavy spending incentives like Lost Ark or Diablo Immortal or the average gacha game, but the only thing worth saying about it is that a lot of people will act righteous about how you should never play one of these games, and then they go on to drop tens of thousands of dollars on a game they postured as a complete cash grab, while throwing the cash at it. If you find a poorly monetized game fun, it's whatever. Just don't act like you're wailing because of some moral lesson you're imparting to people. It was funny with Lost Ark, and it was especially funny with Diablo Immortal. These days, even if you're trying to buy a single-player game that should be complete, you get things like a $50 Red Dead Redemption port that is functionally identical to the PS3 and 360 versions except for resolution. Oh, and it has no online. If you work in games media, the only nice thing you can say about it is the increased resolution, but a 13-year-old game being sold at full price as a port, that is unironically the bare minimum. Gaming has become so unreasonably expensive, and it feels like you can never just buy and own a game. It's very easy to buy into the idea that something has got to give. I don't feel jaded, nor do I feel frustrated with the state of gaming. Undoubtedly, I think the egregious monetization and live service mechanics are frustrating, but I rarely play Ubisoft or Activision Blizzard games because I can tell the engagement mechanics will piss me off. I don't mean to be rude and say it's stupid to care about these issues in gaming. How I actually feel is that taking the failures of AAA gaming and stretching that out to every other game and developer in the medium is unproductive when we talk about video games. When you make a claim like that, you toss aside indie games, the AA space, or good AAA games. It's too often we forget that AAA games that are complete still exist, like Insomniac's Spider-Man or Ghost of Tsushima. It's just hard to focus on and remember those things because live service games are constantly being discussed in the public consciousness. So you've probably heard more people talking about how Halo Infinite is dying and a huge disappointment to the franchise than you have about how much somebody loves a game like AI the Somnium Files, Death Stranding, or even Divinity Original Sin 2. We have to break away from the outrage cycle of these awful games to truly improve how we talk about video games in a critical context. If we color our apathy towards the medium as righteous and justified, we give ourselves an excuse to never try anything new, and just assume that nothing good is being released each year. There's nothing more disingenuous than acting like gaming is on its last legs while refusing to even search for something better. To look for games outside of the top dogs, and you're so confidently telling everyone they should be mad, they should be upset all the time, and you're so cynical you don't even play any games unless it's your job. I hate that. This cycle of being bitter and outraged all the time is ruining discussions about games. We can't even discuss success in good faith anymore, and it's time we admit that. It's no secret that Baldur's Gate 3 is Game of the Year material. It's a game so good that developers are scared that some gamers may have unrealistic expectations about gaming going forward. And whenever you challenge that point, people say, "What? Are you saying that gamers don't deserve better games?" But that's not really fair to the discussion. It actually strips all the nuance out. The whole context of this discussion in its entirety has kind of been stripped out because it's a lot easier to get angry at a guy you made up than it is to actually be fair to people you think of in a fairly adversarial manner. That's not to disrespect the intelligence of people who are frustrated with the state of gaming, but I firmly believe you can't provide fair critique without fairly describing the ideas you're grappling with first. Critically speaking, Baldur's Gate 3 is the top reviewed game ever on Metacritic at the time of writing. standing above both Disco Elysium and Half-Life 2. Many fans and critics are heralding the game as one of the best RPGs of all time, and certainly the best Western RPG ever made. A literal goldmine of gameplay, narrative, and presentation that soars to the skies, carried by the winds of a revived genre known as the CRPG. A CRPG, if you didn't know, is just a computer role-playing game. CRPGs prioritize player agency through things like skill builds, character background traits, quests with multiple decisions or means of resolution, and being able to meaningfully affect the style of combat, questing, and narrative progression based on the traits of your character. If this sounds kinda like D&D or other tabletop games, it's because CRPGs heavily borrow from them. They use this freeform style of adventuring and scales it down to be digestible and programmable, creating games that accommodate different people and their playstyles. Let's move back to the industry response to Baldur's Gate 3. I'm not interested in showing each of the tweets from the industry developers, whether they're AAA devs or indie ones. I'm going to address them broadly because a lot of discussion around this has railroaded a lot of weird harassment towards devs. Especially if the developer works at one of the bad AAA companies, they're not entitled to an opinion, which I think is frankly stupid. I'm not interested in doing PR for big AAA companies, but it'd be irresponsible of me to unintentionally funnel hate people's way, which happens pretty easily on the internet. Let's start with a Twitter thread that started everything. A tweet that politely asks people not to use the success and quality of Baldur's Gate 3 to color their expectations of what RPGs or games in general should be going forward. The dev cites things like over a decade of experience specializing in CRPGs, studio size, early access feedback, and the general popularity of D&D, all being factors that help put wind in the sails of this game. We know that Baldur's Gate is a household name for older gamers, but Larian was bankrolling and funding the marketing for the game as an independent studio. The expenses were likely funded by their critically acclaimed Divinity Original Sin series, which are also CRPGs. As for any additional funding or development contracts, I couldn't find additional public records. Since Larian self-publishes their games, the sales revenue generally goes straight to them, with the exception of the console ports, which were published by other companies. While the thread has a lot of pointed commentary, the key is that Baldur's Gate 3 is not the new baseline for RPGs, and genuinely, I agree with this even as someone who likes CRPGs. I don't think that every RPG needs to be this grandiose, even if the game has a huge budget, because I don't think scale is synonymous with quality or execution. A developer from a different studio, which is about 10 times smaller than Larian, commented that Baldur's Gate 3 is likely a once-in-a-lifetime project, and that they hope that nobody expects a small or medium-sized studio of about 10 to 40 people make a game like this. For some added context, Larian has almost shuttered numerous times throughout its history, and the CEO of Larian put up his own house as collateral to make Divinity Original Sin 1, believing fully in the project and its success, but now houses over 400 devs in about 7 studios across the world. A director from a previously independent company that is now owned by Microsoft commented that the conditions in which Baldur's Gate 3 were developed were atypical, but this is not a slight against Larian for their passion and hard work. It's more that having an established baseline makes the development process go more smoothly, which a lot of studios aren't equipped to do. People are really angry about this specific comment because they're interpreting the commentary as criticism to give AAA studios an out to say, look, don't expect games to be good, but that's not what is being argued. All the commentary so far is specifically talking about the feasibility of replicating the expertise that Larian has built up over the last decade. If you're a shop that specializes in selling subs, right, and you've never made or sold burgers commercially, you're not really sure what kind of consumer base you might have to sell those burgers to, nor are you certain that investing in good burger making will pay off. Naturally, you're hesitant to make burgers at a sandwich shop, so you don't have contracts with vendors that sell you materials for the patties or the bread, but you probably have some transferable ingredients like lettuce and other vegetables and sauces that can go in a burger. It's unreasonable to expect a shop that doesn't specialize in burgers to be able to recreate a burger of the same quality as another shop that does. That's not a function of a studio's size and its capital, that's literally a function of expertise which Larian has built for the last 10 years. It's not like we expect a studio like Rockstar or Insomniac to be able to make good JRPGs because they have more capital than a Japanese game dev, and that kind of assertion is ridiculous. Another indie dev added to the conversation saying that games don't need a baseline of scale and technological complexity because it can be a damaging concept for gaming. Naturally, people took the worst possible read on this commentary, interpreting the message as games don't have to be good, they don't have to be dense or complete, nor should consumers expect better. When developers, especially indie devs, are pushing back against the notion of a baseline, they're talking about unreasonable expectations for scope. They're not giving themselves a get out of jail for free card if they make a terrible game. When you play a game that seems like it's supposed to be a walking simulator, you don't expect it to have skill trees or random encounters like JRPGs. You don't expect it to have things like an ammo economy that might be in an immersive sim or maybe a horror game. You tend to expect things like exposition, exploration, and maybe some puzzles. By extension, thinking that the $20 you spend on one game should be as feature-dense as the $20 you spend on another is one of the reasons that people hate indie games out of hand. They think that if the money you spend doesn't have the same replayability like Slay the Spire or Hades, then the game isn't worth the money, which is honestly a really harmful concept for the metric of value in gaming as a medium. This kind of ties back to the skewed perception of value that modern games engender in people. Games that have a story that simply start and end without any kind of post-game or replayability are often devalued as worthless experiences. Even people that I talk to have pretty weird views on how much games should cost, disregarding things like labor, art, programming, and the overall production of a game. When I was younger, I bought a game called To the Moon, which some of you might know because it was pretty popular to make Let's Plays for it back in the day. And that game starts and ends in about 3 hours, but it's genuinely such a heartfelt and thoughtful story that I didn't mind that I couldn't squeeze every dollar out for 80 hours. I looked at the scope, I appreciated what the scope was and how it was executed, and I liked what I was offered. I thought the entire experience was really enjoyable and memorable. I still think about that game to this day. I don't think that the time it takes to beat a game should be its final consideration on whether it's worthwhile in terms of price, which is why I think that a baseline for games or genres can be pretty unhelpful. Not many people are out here saying that Assassin's Creed games are at their peak because you can play them for 100 hours, especially when the gameplay is just collect items, take over a fortress, and do all this fluff that isn't really characteristic of the early series. It's honestly not a helpful point of critique. Katana Zero is like 4 hours long, and it's $15, but very few people give this a negative review. Some do because it's short, but most people play the game, they enjoy the aesthetic, the music, the gameplay, and its execution just feels solid. Very few people think about games in terms of its cost per hour, because it's generally an absurd way to think about and talk about video games. Nobody walks out of a movie and calculates the ticket cost against the runtime, and it's so weird that people even make this point. It's really easy to argue something like that if you just assume that every game that you're going to play is functionally incomplete, but you don't really have a reason to think that outside of the AAA space. One of the most controversial comments came from a senior member at Xbox, arguing that the scope of Baldur's Gate 3 is Rockstar level nonsense for scope and that very few teams could try this. While the wording is quite provocative, the sentiment is probably true. I don't think any studio at Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo could make a CRPG this expansive, with the exception of Obsidian. However, I'd remind you that Larian has exclusively made CRPGs for the last decade, playing a key role in reviving the genre alongside Harebrained Studios, Obsidian, inXile, and a few others who helped kickstart games that threw us into a new golden age of CRPGs. Obsidian has not exclusively made CRPGs, having worked on games like The Outer Worlds, Pentiment, and they're currently working on a game called Avowed, which looks more like Elder Scrolls than it does Pillars of Eternity. Very few companies have both scale and expertise at their disposal. The real factor that people ignore when discussing Baldur's Gate 3 and the broader games industry is that they know Larian is independent, having refused buyouts from the big dogs in the industry, but they're ignoring 10 years of expertise in the modern CRPG genre. Larian is a huge studio. It has over 400 employees specialized to make CRPGs, which is a detail that no other studio, regardless of whether they're indie or AAA, has. And that certainly won't change in the future. There have been erroneous claims that Larian had a lot of money because Wizards of the Coast has this IP, which just isn't true. Did they have a lot of funding from the success of their previous games? Yes, but that's not the same thing as Wizards giving them a bag. There are other comments and pieces of rhetoric I could touch on, but honestly, I think that's all we need to hear. So we're discussing Baldur's Gate 3 as this cudgel that proves how greedy and apathetic the broader games industry is apparently. We're calling these critiques unreasonable because they apply to a game that we like. Okay, well, as someone who's actually played all their other games, I don't expect or want games to be this dense or have this scale. Yeah, I'm smiling like crazy, having a good time with this game because I can romance every single companion, I can push bosses off cliffs to cheese a fight, and I can choose to fight anyone I want without the game punishing me for it. I can play the game my own way, because the game accommodates my every whim. The game is not a weapon you take to battle. It's not an indictment of the broader gaming industry, and it's not a reflection of how lazy and uninspired other developers are. As someone who's seen the other side of this, very few developers set out to make a game they're not proud of. Even the average Blizzard game has sparks of brilliance, but they're at the whims of their senior managers and project leads who inject all that egregious progression and monetization and get told to sell it to their players with a smile on their face even if they hate it. Yeah, sometimes game devs say stupid things on Twitter that incite a lot of backlash. But let's not act like the majority of staff in a studio feel the rewards trickle down from record revenues. All they get to keep is their jobs, while being blamed for something they're not responsible for. I liked playing Overwatch 2 as a game. I didn't get the impression that the game lacked direction or quality. It's the progression and monetization that really lost me as a player. If you want to know what rank you are after 3 hours of playing, I hope you won 7 games or lost 20. Otherwise, you won't know how your ranking changed at all, which is absurd. It's like if League implemented a system that hid your LP until you played 3 games. If people don't feel like you respect their time and money, and playing your game feels relatively unrewarding, they're gonna walk. And walk they did. So much that Blizzard even admitted it out loud. Larian spent 10 years helping revive the CRPG genre, making games like Original Sin 1 and 2. But the thing that frustrates me about that discussion is that they weren't alone in doing this. There was the Shadowrun trilogy by Harebrained Schemes, Pillars of Eternity by Obsidian, who used to be indie, the Wasteland series by inXile, and many others I haven't given a try myself. If there really was a shifting expectation for complexity, I think it would have begun a long time ago. Maybe there's credence to the idea that Baldur's Gate 3 will damage people's interpretation of value with games, but that's not unique to this game. This discussion of value about games is interlinked with the outrage cycles that we're constantly in. The reason that people even like games like Baldur's Gate 3 is because it's part of a role-playing subgenre that hinges almost entirely on player agency. In these games, you're more or less picking the brain of the writers and programmers and how they thought you might diverge from the quest instructions by investigating the setting, by thinking outside the box and dialogue, and committing yourself to more inquisitive adventuring to see the different possibilities and outcomes of your decisions. Many people are ranting on and on about how it's not unreasonable to just want more or to get your money's worth as a consumer. I don't disagree with that, no one does. The alluring rhetoric that it's not wrong to ask for more and have your money respected, it's not exactly accurate to the discussion because the developers aren't talking about value and money, they're talking about a game's scope and a complex game infusing expectations onto a game that doesn't need that complexity. Even though Larian's getting a lot of money and going to get a lot of accolades, they're not even ready to make the next Divinity. Making this game was such an undertaking that they're taking a holiday after this because this is honestly a generational game. Not many games are going to size up to this, no matter how much money, no matter how much time you have. A lot of CRPGs are actually far less complex and their gameplay is a lot shorter, but that doesn't make them functionally inferior on an artistic level, because most of the ones I've played rarely engender a feeling that something is missing. When you're a smaller studio and you have less expertise in something, why would you try to put too many things in? I know Rockstar has kind of destroyed gaming discourse by having realistic horseshitting physics that some poor contractor has to make, but the details in CRPGs are mostly to enhance the ability to make you feel like you actually have meaningful choices. If you go back and play Original Sin 1 or Pillars of Eternity, they're not as complex as Baldur's Gate 3. But they're still fun games that don't feel hollow or incomplete because they achieve their design goals convincingly. The key is making people aware of the scope and goal of your game in an extremely obvious way that doesn't belittle their intelligence. If your game sufficiently conveys that info to people, they're not going to expect random and superfluous mechanics to appear later in the game. The very notion of attention to detail and its role in shaping a baseline standard for gaming seems like this virtuous and meaningful thing that is pro-consumer in some sense. But when you break down just how many extra details never really enhance the experience of the game in a lasting way, you'll probably find that the absence of subtleties is not proof of laziness, nor is it anti-consumer. Sure, if you love seeing 100 details you may have missed in Red Dead 2 or The Last of Us Part 2, you're probably not happy that I undermined the importance of these things. But I'm not moved by the immense viscera of a character touching every surface or realistic plant physics that tank the frame rate substantially. Even if there's no performance cost, there's labor involved in making all of these details. I think taking this discussion in bad faith and shifting everything into an us versus them scenario is honestly the kind of tribalism that you expect from the gaming community. It's very appealing to engage in this cycle of cynicism because the AAA games that are most visible are the ones that suck. There's no way you have this opinion about this indie game. You work on Destiny 2, which is an awfully monetized game that robs me all the time. Or you who works at Blizzard or Microsoft that put out nothing but flops. I don't agree with this rhetoric or mindset because it doesn't even get to the heart of the commentary. All we're doing is reading things badly, effectively making up a guy to get mad at, and then getting mad at that guy who didn't actually say what we're insinuating they said. The discussion isn't expect less and want less and be content with less because we're gonna rob you more. Yeah, that is one way to read it, but that's not what was said in those tweets at all. We're not showing developers anything by saying that we're going to unreasonably expect more from games that don't need more features. It's not a pro-consumer movement to say that games that don't need superfluous features should have them. This whole discussion is especially funny to me because I followed the development of Kickstarter games, Divinity Original Sin having been one of them, and I think about Star Citizen, which is in alpha over a decade into development. If we demand more from games that don't really need those extra features, we're just going to end up with more Star Citizens. At the end of all that, when a game is missing features but it never inferred or implied that it would have them is kind of a bad practice. Yes, you can compare it to other games in the same medium, but if it's not essential to the gameplay experience nor the design goals, you're just saying it to say it. I feel like judging games by what's missing when nothing about the game implied or inferred that it would have those things is honestly one of the worst things you can critique about a game, because it's one thing to have a badly written character arc or have an unclear resolution for certain things in the story. That is a valid situation where something is missing and you criticize that. But if it is missing a feature that Baldur's Gate 3 has, but it's not essential to the other game you're talking about, most people aren't going to be bothered by this. If we want to do right by Baldur's Gate 3, showing the industry that we want feature-complete games without battle passes or season passes or whatever, we have to keep them relevant, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't disrespect the efforts of Larian. This game is lovingly crafted from the top down, and it's more often used as a point of discourse to insult other games, as opposed to constantly iterating and celebrating the good things about it. Not every new game needs to be a clone of something you like. I think as a community, gamers can belittle the intelligence of others unwittingly. We got tired of the incessant commitment to making a hit battle royale, and when the bubble burst, tons of games and studios got wiped out, even ones managed by Epic Games. Larian themselves have said they're not beginning production on another game like this because they're acutely aware of how hard it is, even with their expertise. To me, Baldur's Gate 3 is in fact a grand experience. It's probably going to be my game of the year over FF16, which I loved. Naturally, Larian's gonna need time off after making this because this is a once-in-a-generation game. The effort that went into this, the time and money, is unlike anything Divinity had. How does a game doing well remind us what we hate about gaming? A game being good should just give us hope that there are still good corners of gaming that we haven't explored. This genre didn't even appear overnight. Original Sin 2 was one of the highest selling RPGs in 2017, and PC Gamer gave it Game of the Year. I promise you, after you're done with this game, you'll realize just how many hardworking studios were putting their hearts and souls into this genre. Baldur's Gate 3 is a capstone of a market that these devs carved out in spite of the niche being much smaller than online games or first-person shooters. They didn't chase trends, they just made what they wanted and what they liked. We always come back to this idea that the value in gaming has shifted. I'm not talking about just the box price. I'm talking about what is required or expected out of a game to be good or successful. A lot of people already undermine games because of their graphics. The aesthetic alone is why a lot of people have never bothered to play Original Sin 1 or 2, because the character models aren't as sexy or prominent as features of the game, whereas Baldur's Gate 3 has very cinematic dialogue and cutscenes. When we overstate the necessity for certain details and features of a game, especially where it's unwarranted, we're just damaging games criticism with unrealistic standards and bars to meet, while waxing on that if Baldur's Gate 3 can do it, why can't Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo? If we encourage games to move toward this absurd level of depth and complexity that don't functionally improve the experience, but just have systems to have systems, that's not going to make a good or enjoyable game. It's going to make something that is borderline unplayable. If you want every game to go down the road of Star Citizen, that is your right, but I don't see the point in that. Even as someone who loves CRPGs, I don't want every game to have branching paths and all this replayability. Like, it's specific to this genre, and I appreciate it in the genre. I don't think that everything needs to become like that. It's not wrong to want games that are good and functional, things that respect your money, but that is so far beside the point of saying that games shouldn't have scope creep. We're so deep in this pit of talking about games as a dying medium that is failed regularly by big AAA companies that exceptionalism is the only thing we're willing to accept as valuable. We're not allowed to consider a humble $15 indie game as something that's Game of the Year material because it doesn't have the best graphics, it doesn't have the best systems or replayability. There's all these metrics why we dismiss things in the indie space, even though CRPGs are largely indie games. We talk about how much we hate the ugliness of the live service content model and how it just wants to keep you playing, and then we want games to be unreasonably dense in terms of their content and scope, even where it's kind of unwarranted. I feel that idea is kind of absurd. Everyone should feel that they've gotten their money's worth when they buy a game, but that doesn't mean the game has to be replayable or generational or a groundbreaking experience. I honestly agree with the game devs saying that overvaluing scope is going to be harmful for gaming, because $10 you spend on one game is not going to match $10 you spend on another, but that doesn't mean those two games won't be novel experiences that you ingrain into the person that you are. I think it's easy to forget that as kids, we played everything that came our way. We figured out what we liked, we figured out what we didn't. We took pieces of every little thing that we liked, and that contributed to who we became as people, the things that we love, the things that we prioritize and care about. Those things are all affected by our hobbies and interests. If we start power scaling games by how effective is this $50 versus this $50, sure, that's helpful in the AAA space, but when you move down into the indie space, it's honestly really harmful for games. If you went by playtime and replayability as a metric of a good game, then roguelites would trump every game, but obviously we don't talk about games like that. The games that have shaped us into who we are, they're so distinct, memorable, and deeply meaningful parts of us that we rarely frame in terms of the money we spent to play them. Sure, we didn't know how much they cost as kids, but now I don't even think about how much I spent on a game that I really liked. I don't think about FF16 or Baldur's Gate 3 like that, because it's just unhelpful to talk about games this way. Gaming as a medium is not dying because the exploitation factory put out another full-priced game with a cash shop and battle passes. That's just a corner of rot we can't look away from. We have to constantly iterate how much we hate it, how much we see it, and how much we're frustrated and fed up with it. It's a slow-moving car crash on a packed highway in a lane we're not even driving on. We're choosing to look over our shoulder at it. There are games across the industry that might move and change you. The negativity you feel about the medium is so entrenched that Baldur's Gate 3 is just another reason to validate that bitterness inside you instead of putting a smile on your face. The only thing a game has to achieve for me is feeling like the developer took care in what they made. I can feel that in a lot of these flawed games, and the monetization problem with a lot of games doesn't have to do with devs. They're just the public-facing punching bags that their managers make take all the beatings. Even if a game just feels like a 6 or a 7, it can still mean a lot to you. You can feel the effort, the passion, and while it might not be your perfect match, you'll probably remember it. People tend to appreciate when it feels like devs cared even if they fail in their goal in the end. A game's scope doesn't need to be comparable to another game arbitrarily. Maybe the game you're making is only a 10-hour experience, but even The Last of Us, which was $60, wasn't very long compared to a JRPG in a different genre. It would honestly be absurd for me to compare something like a good Halo campaign to the story of Trails in the Sky, because nothing meaningful results from that comparison. Games are indeed getting more expensive, they're getting greedier and feeling less and less excusable in the things emitted from the game. They sell you things like day 1 season passes, pre-order bonuses so you can never have all the items in the game. It's time we look away from the AAA gaming space and stop modifying our behaviors around live service games and vapid experiences. All those things will one day disappear when the season ends, the balance patch hits, or the servers shut down. The only way we can improve our outlook on how we discuss gaming as a medium is to actually play games. The things they want from these developers that can no longer put out games that were so good in their childhood, lead them to cope with it by giving up on gaming as a whole. You're not wrong for wanting things to be better, to have your time and money respected, but you're looking in the wrong corner of the medium to find the fulfilling things you're looking for. I'm sure a friend of yours that loves exploration games has told you to play Outer Wilds while telling you nothing about it. You've probably met someone that loves AI the Somnium Files, Zero Escape, 13 Sentinels, or Higurashi, because they really like visual novel games. You might know a friend that loves JRPGs that swears up and down that if you just play the Trails in the Sky trilogy, that Cold Steel will live up to its reputation as peak fiction. You've probably heard that people tend to think Undertale is overrated just because it's indie, then they play it and realize, nah, that game actually did live up to the hype. Everybody has that one friend who plays super old games like Baldur's Gate 2, or maybe old Japanese games like Tokimeki Memorial. The best thing is when people love games that nobody has heard of, like Shadow Hearts, Galerians, Virtualon, and for me, lately I've been loving Baldur's Gate 3, though I've been thinking about replaying Lisa and the Uncharted series, and honestly I kinda want to play Killzone 2 as well. The gaming medium isn't dead, but the cycle of outrage, discourse, and the damage all of that has done to critical discussions of gaming as an art form is distracting us from the really obvious answer to our woes. We have to look for games that we will enjoy, whether they're new, old, or games we grew up with, to remind ourselves why we ever had hope. The cynicism and constant negativity isn't wisdom. It's a light inside us that's dying out so bitterly that a game being beautiful and enjoyable as Baldur's Gate 3 is a launch pad for more madness, more anger, more bitterness, when it should be proof of life in a so-called dead hobby. It's inconvenient for big publishers if gamers come to realize that the top-end companies do not control gaming as a whole. Many do realize that, but still fixate on every failure in gaming more than they bother to explore and experience new things across the medium. It's way easier to make content about gaming and its dire state and fostering more negativity than it is to start and just complete games we want to play. A patch of dead grass isn't proof of a dying field. Maybe someone salted the earth, maybe it's just burned in the midst of conflict, but if you take a step past it and walk until you see the horizon, it's more than likely you'll see a beautiful field that thrives in spite of any obstacle that makes AAA gaming unbearable. I promise you, if you look past the worst of AAA gaming, you'll see why people stress that games like Baldur's Gate 3 are the culmination of the revival of a dead genre, as opposed to being some Kingslayer we've propped it up as. Its success is proof you should have hope, as opposed to a reminder of how many publishers fail you. If gaming has been dying for years, a genre could not come back to life in spite of market trends around battle royales and live services. To think that gaming is dying because greedy companies are being greedy validates the flawed belief that gaming starts and ends with AAA. None of us think that. They may have made a part of our childhoods, but they're not going to write the future. To properly discuss gaming as an art form, we have to excise that ugly and bitter person inside us that can't frame their enjoyment of something without putting something else down. That part of us that gets constantly told to get mad, get outraged, demand more. It's also self-righteous. You can convince yourself of anything when you feel that way. But I don't. I feel hope. I know this medium is alive and well. I love Shadowrun, I love Pillars, I love Divinity, I'm having a blast with Baldur's Gate, and I enjoyed a AAA game in Final Fantasy XVI. How could I ever think that gaming is dead, when this year has had so many good games in the indie and AAA space? You just have to be willing to try. It starts and ends with the communities we form, the memories we make, the bonds we forge. All of that coalesces into what gaming means to me and a lot of people I know. Let's stop looking at these train wrecks and looking at these failed projects. Let's look for games we want to play and enjoy. Because in the end, isn't that what it's all about? I think the grass has always been green, because I walked past that burnt patch so long ago.
I learned to fly because of you. So if you left, I could go too. And everything you saw in me, that's what I wanted to be. Did I make it after all? All the grass on the other side. Is it only greener in my mind? I'd still want it the same, because trading my yesterday is to wish my life away.
I've been Meatman, thank you for watching my essay. I was pretty sick for a while and I'm still getting a lot of tests done and everything, but I appreciate you all for supporting my writing, and if you're new to my channel, I try to upload twice a month. I try to write about things I mostly feel inspired by. If you enjoyed the content or simply want to challenge any of my points, feel free to do so below. Everyone else, please like if you liked, dislike if you didn't, subscribe if you want to see more, and a link to the public Discord will be below. Thank you for the support, as I've been really struggling to record this for a while. You know, just having some health issues, but we're so back, and I've got plenty of bangers in store for you all. Take it easy. Bye.